Divorce Talk Radio does not give legal advice, neither does it reflect the views of Rockford College. To obtain legal advice, you need to retain an attorney in your own jurisdiction.
Good evening, folks, and welcome to Divorce Talk Radio. This is attorney Brad Tengler here in the studio with Eileen McCartan to talk about the PACT class and co-parenting classes, the PACT class being a required class here in Winnebago County for folks going through a divorce. Eileen, we're here to talk about the PACT class and co-parenting classes this evening. But before we begin with that, could you give a little bit of background about yourself?
First of all, thanks very much for inviting me to talk about PACT and co-parenting. My background is I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor, and I'm a mediator. Been mediating and doing therapy for a long time in this area. I'm also a mediator in Rock County, Wisconsin. I started doing parent education probably about 10 years ago when I saw the need for really parents to be educated about what was important for their kids. So I now do the parent education, focusing on the mandatory parent education and the and the co-parenting class, which is a specialized approach. I'm also a coach for collaborative law.
And if we can just briefly touch on these four areas, you say you're a mediator too.
Yes.
And what is involved in your role as a mediator?
As a mediator, oftentimes parents are court ordered to participate in the mediation process. And when they're ordered to participate in mediation, they have a 3-hour requirement here in Winnebago County. So I serve as a neutral third person that really facilitates a discussion between the parents to come up with decisions for their kids. I'm not in any kind of role that gives advice or recommendations to the court.
Okay. And then you specifically said that you're a coach in collaborative law. What is a coach in collaborative law?
Collaborative law is a cooperative process that employs really specialists in different areas to help parents navigate the divorce process. And as a coach, I'm there to assist parents in kind of figuring out what their goals are, addressing some concerns, and supporting them in the emotional process as they try to make decisions for the future.
Very good. And then you mentioned the PACT class and co-parenting classes. What is PACT?
PACT stands for Parents and Children Together. And it's the mandatory parent education that has really been required in this area since the early 90s, but in 2006 became a 4-hour mandate. Parents must complete before finalizing their divorce or any other court process that involves minor children.
When you say a 4-hour mandate, what do you mean by mandate?
The Supreme Court in 2006 mandated parent education for all parents of minor children, parents that are involved in some sort of litigation.
And so this is across the board, across the counties in Illinois.
Yes.
By Illinois Supreme Court rule, all parties who are going through a divorce must go to PACT classes. Is that right?
That's right.
What about non-divorcing couples, but say couples in family court or ex-couples in family court that have children together? Do they have to take PACT?
From my perspective, that they should be taking PACT. I don't know the exact wording right now of the Supreme Court rule, but I believe it's all parents of minor children. So I would say that parents that don't live in the same home and are trying to parent kids from 2 homes should be taking the PACT class so they have the information at their fingertips to effectively parent.
You said that the PACT class is a 4-hour class. What are the different topics that parties, for lack of a better word, that for parties listen to or participate in during these classes? Or this class?
Yeah, there's lots of information actually we cover. We have a PowerPoint presentation. It's an interactive class where parents are asking questions and participating, though limiting some of the personal information. It's certainly not just a complaint session. So we keep it on track. We show a couple of videos. It's very engaging. We want them to have their thinking caps on, and we give them lots of information that's based on research. Interestingly, the information that we have as professionals isn't very old. In 1975, there was about 4 pieces of research on how divorce affects kids. Now we have well over 2,000 pieces of research.
Wow.
So everything we really know about kids and divorce, we've really discovered in the last 35 years.
Do divorcing couples have to take this class together, or can they take it separately?
They take it separately for the most part.
That must be nice and a relief to them.
Right. And, that's one of the first questions we answer for parents. But we often have parents that want to take the class together. So we allow that as long as we get confirmation from each parent that they're comfortable doing that. And
Sure.
there are no existing orders for protection.
Okay. So if there's some kind of domestic violence
Yeah.
going on, then they're
Of course, we're
obviously
not.
not going to be taking that together.
Right. So we screen very carefully for that. But there's lots of parents that are quite cooperative out there. They're typically not the ones that are being seen by attorneys, but they're
Sure.
very cooperative, and they're a real asset to the class because some of the other parents are just amazed at how effectively parents can co-parent.
Amazed by what the class has to offer?
Well, when they're in the class, when a couple's in there together and they're talking about their level of communication and how they're working together to make decisions for their kids, they're good role models for other people in the class that have not been successful in some of those areas.
I didn't know much about the class originally when I began practicing divorce law, and one of my clients came to me and said, "Brad, you will not believe how good this class is." Honestly, I was kind of shocked because I thought, I see you smiling, I thought, it's a requirement by
Right.
local ordinances. The judges are making our clients do this, and they got to go through the motions and get it done. But when that client came back to me, my perspective changed. What are the different topics that it addresses specifically? I mean, what you said, there's video presentations,
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah, well, that is just so rewarding for me to hear because, we are always meeting a group of people that are very sullen and not wanting to be
Sure.
in class. And typically by the end of the class, we have had lots of interaction. We get very good kind of scores on our evaluations, so it makes us feel good because we're committed to helping parents navigate this very difficult process. So what do we talk about? We start off by really a little bit of a history lesson about divorce and how laws change over time and what's happening in society and culture, and the high rate of divorce, but more importantly now kind of the even higher rate of kids that are navigating a two-home family system. And that number is 70% these days. So that's huge, and so we quite kind of put it forth to parents right away. So what's the meaning of family now?
What was the percentage that you gave?
70% of all kids born this year, they're going to live in a single-parent household sometime during their childhood.
I had no idea that was this.
So if the divorce
statistic.
rate is 50%, 70% are going to live in a single-parent home. And when we say single-parent, we don't mean a parent has died. We mean a parent is single-parenting in one home, the other parent is single-parenting in the other home.
Wow.
And this includes, these complicated family dynamics. There's lots and lots of parents that have children that don't get married.
Sure.
These days we have same-sex parents. We have all sorts of different types of families, certainly different than when I was growing up. When I was growing up, there was, if a girl got pregnant, she was shipped off and, had to give the baby up for adoption, and it was a big secret. So things have changed.
Sure.
And so we put forth to parents, the big question, so what does family mean to you? And We want to know what parents' vision is for their children. What are the value systems? What do they hold important? What do they want for their kids? And so they're kind of right away faced with some really kind of deep questions that they have to contemplate and reflect on. One of the other things we ask is whether they think kids are doomed or whether they're resilient. And we ask that in the beginning because we want them to answer that question again at the end of the class, because we're going to give them a lot of information. Oftentimes it's just, no, they're resilient, they're just fine. And when we ask that again, after they've heard kind of the risks associated with divorce, it's a different answer. It's a big, it depends. Some kids are doomed because of what their parents are doing.
That is very interesting. So you begin your classes with those kinds of interactive questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
Getting them to think. What is it that they want? What do they want their kids to say 25 years from now looking back? And often, I would say always, we have some parents that have experienced their own parents' divorce. So we ask that question, well, how would you describe your parents' the relationship after they got divorced? And you get an occasional, oh, they got along great, but for the most part, people report back, I lost contact with a parent, typically dad, or, they still can't be in the same room.
Sure.
So we really are wanting to, really put forth the questions that get them to think about what they want for their kids.
After you begin with these questions, then what's the next step in the class?
We move into kind of the immediate effects and the effects of separation on kids. We ask them what their kids are experiencing. So we really kind of start to move into the emotional process for kids. Parents then begin to share, what they're seeing in their children, whether it's sadness, anger, confusion, acting out. We talk about the problems for kids, what are kind of the risk factors. We go into a great deal of we go into great detail about the risks associated with divorce, and they range from the loss of a parent, which is kind of a hallmark of divorce. A parent kind of just walks away and doesn't remain involved in a child's life.
Meaning like a deadbeat parent who
Yeah.
is not involved, has walked away not only from their spouse, but from the children as well.
Absolutely. And sometimes it's because of the conflict between the parents, but also the loss that goes beyond the parental loss. It is the loss of extended family members, supportive friends, and, so it's really a pervasive loss. And we talk about kind of the economic loss, the difficulty just with how many more stressors there are that parents are dealing with, the quality of parenting that sometimes is a result of single parenting because of the stressors. The quality of parenting can go down. We talk about the risk of relocation, a parent moving, or a parent and child moving, the effects of negative conflict, and we really do a lot of education about negative conflict. Really, conflict is part of our everyday life, and conflict creates change. Conflict can be managed well, and that's what we really try to teach, is that everybody has disagreements. It's how you manage it. But negative conflict is more of the hostile, the blaming, the very entrenched conflict that does not ever solve the problem, and how that affects kids.
You mentioned, just to step back a few issues, you mentioned economic loss and its effect on children?
Yeah, everybody takes about a 30% hit financially when they divorce or separate.
And why is that?
It's more expensive to, have two homes instead of one.
Sure.
And both parents are doing double duty, working, trying to. There's never enough money to go around, right? That's probably the number one reason for divorce is finances. But then a child is oftentimes the one who doesn't get the opportunity to maybe participate in an extracurricular activity or eventually can't have the funds to go to college. So it really, I guess the level of financial security is threatened a great deal. I mean, there's always families that have enough money to go around, but that isn't the norm that we see.
You also mentioned, when I go to the effect of negative conflict on children.
Yeah.
What are some of the insights that the class provides?
Well, we talk about, how a child really will start to shut down. Sometimes they act out, but oftentimes they shut down. They're in this very compromised position of trying to remain loyal to both parents, so they get stuck in a loyalty bind. It creates a great deal of fear for them, a high level of conflict. They're denied permission to love both parents. Do
you see parents encouraging that?
We talk about the big mistakes, right, that parents make when kids are now having to serve as a communicator because parents refuse to talk to one another. When parents say negative things about one another. Oftentimes, the big mistakes, I think, are made kind of unintentionally. There's some of the pitfalls of how stressful and complicated this is. And, healthy parents, when they start to hear the information in the class, it's amazing. They just kind of go, oh, wow, I realized I was doing this. I got to knock it off. I mean, the fog lifts, boy, they're back right on track. They self-correct. There's parents that, no matter how much education they're going to get, they're stuck in a very negative dynamic with the other parent, and the children suffer.
Do you see parents going back and forth between that healthy dynamic and negative dynamic depending on where they are in their own personal lives or where they are in the midst of the divorce?
Yeah, certainly it's rougher at the start. My benchmark is when I'm working with a couple, I'm always kind of assessing, have you gotten along better in the past than you are right now, trying to figure out, where are they on the continuum. It takes probably about 18 months for people to really get to kind of a new normal. Mm-hmm. And so in the beginning, it's rough. You can see very, very good people acting very badly because of the high level of emotional pain they're in. Over time, healthy parents are going to simmer down. What happens then is they often avoid each other because it's painful still. But they try to avoid the conflict. Well-intentioned, they stop talking to one another, which does serve a purpose, but it's hard to effectively parent without talking to one another.
Do you address how parents should talk to each other, or communicate, and I guess is a better word, when they are in that very difficult place with their ex-spouse?
Yeah, we talk about really learning how to self-regulate, contain the emotions, work through their own emotional process. It's really a process of grief they're going through.
Sure. Using email rather than the phone?
Well, actually, I'd shift into the co-parenting where we do a little bit more direct education in the co-parenting class about really the way they communicate. And we would like to see them actually communicate in person or on the phone. I know that people prefer.
You mean initially or ultimately?
I think both.
Sure.
I think that email and text is a crutch that doesn't always effectively do what they want it to do.
Yeah.
There can be stacks of
Texting,
really right.
So that's dangerous.
Right. And everything is now written.
Right.
All their slams and
all those things.
But sometimes it's absolutely necessary because it contains it, and there is a level of accountability.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's not my first choice. I want people to learn how to regulate themselves and show a little social and emotional maturity.
Absolutely.
Because that's the only way their kids are going to learn it.
So these are some of the immediate effects that you were talking about of separation on children.
Yeah.
And how you get parties to discuss and engage in these kinds of things. After you talk about the immediate effects, is there another step in the class that you then have people address, or videos that they watch?
Yeah, we show them a video in the beginning about the developmental stages of children. Because, at the same time we're giving them all this information, we want them to start thinking about Their task is to create a parenting plan. They have to figure out how to effectively parent a child from two homes.
And what do you mean by a parenting plan?
A parenting plan is going to be a written document that is going to cover how they make decisions, what decisions they're going to make together, what's the schedule of time,
Okay.
what are they going to do for vacations, what about holiday, how are they going to communicate, how are they going to make decisions together, like a procedure, how are they going to go off schedule. So it's going to cover kind of all the nuts and bolts. And, this is kind of their very explicit agreement to contain some of the conflict. And that this plan will change over time, really according to what's happening for the child, age and stage of development, and what's happening for parents. So we want them to think of it as kind of a living document that is always open for modification, and that ideally you're going to try to raise a child in a way that's as close to what they might have experienced had parents stayed together.
Is the parenting plans that you're talking about, is that the equivalent of a joint parenting agreement or a co-parenting agreement?
It would be, but we really want them to start not just to think about this in terms of kind of legalese.
Okay.
We want them to get really, this is their plan for their child.
Sure.
How are extended family members going to have access? How are kids are going to be introduced to new partners in the future? We want them to think ahead. There's a lot of, I would say, just basic parenting that we want them to focus on.
These parenting plans do they put them together while they're in your class?
No.
Okay.
No, we're just kind of giving them an outline.
And when you provide them with that outline, is this after they watch the video on the developmental stages of children?
Yeah, because then we talk about parenting time schedules and appropriate schedules for kids. We go into a little bit, not too much information about that, but that if you separate when you have a 1-year-old, the schedule of time is going to be different than if you have a 16-year-old. And that should be modified over time. And, how would you be parenting if you were still together?
Do people ever take this class as a couple or as a post-couple couple? If that makes sense?
Absolutely. They
come together sometimes?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that just about every class we have at least one set of co-parents.
Wow.
And they're cooperative because they've been screened. So, I'm always asking parents, if you have to rate your co-parenting relationship, which what we're concerned about is what's your level of communication, what's your level of cooperation on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being high, where are you at? And so the people that we have in class are probably an 8, 9, or 10.
Okay.
They're very cooperative. We're not going to put a couple in the class together that are at a 2.
That could be a disaster.
Right.
That could be a disaster. What else is offered in the class?
So we show another video. This is towards the end of the class. It's actually a video done by a colleague of mine out in Colorado where kids are interviewed. And we kind of wrap up with that. It's very touching. And it really, out of the mouths of kids, right?
Sure.
They are really telling parents the do's, the do-nots, what kids need. And it's very powerful.
So this is a video where the children are actually giving advice to the parents.
And talking to parents, really telling parents what it feels like to be in this position. And, parents are moved. So we end the class with that, after we've kind of given them all this information, and then it's kind of their choice on how they do it. But they can't say they don't have the information to do it in a better way than they might be doing it now.
Absolutely. Part of that wrap-up session, is there a game plan that people come up with at the end of the class in terms of how they're going to approach their divorce?
One of the things, I kind of, when I teach the class, we have different facilitators, so we all do the class a little bit differently. So when I teach the class, I like to wrap it up with, what have you done that's helped your kid? I want to end on the positives. And I often get, I get very, positive remarks. Parents are, we're talking on a regular basis, or I'm spending more time with my kids. I'm listening more. Parents are, this is a topic so close to their hearts, right, that they're really doing a heroic job, many of them, to make it work for their kids. And so then I kind of move it into, well, we know exactly what successful co-parents do. We've studied successful co-parents, and they do 6 things very well. And this is actually kind of the outline for our co-parenting class.
Okay.
That we, that's kind of like a, level 2. It's more intensive. Co-parents take it together. But I end the class with letting them know, here's what, evaluate yourself. Are you doing what successful co-parents do? And if you're not, you got a little work to do. And know that this is a journey that's not going to happen overnight. And it's how you have a healthy family, whether it's 1 home or 2.
Right. You had also mentioned co-parenting classes that you help facilitate.
Yeah.
What is the difference between the co-parenting classes that you facilitate and the PACT class that you facilitate?
Okay. The PACT class is a 4-hour class, and that's, of course, mandatory. The co-parenting class is a 4-week class, and it's actually an 8-hour class, so it's 2 hours every week for 4 weeks. And it is based on very specific research. It's a very structured class. Parents take it together. The parents that we typically have in the class are ones that have been involved in the court system for some time, and that there's a rather high level of conflict.
I've asked judges to send my client and another party to the co-parenting classes.
I
because
appreciate that.
I've heard good things about it, especially in light when you think you can avoid, say, a guardian ad litem, and mediation has failed.
Right.
And this is one way to get the parties really to start talking about their kids. So.
It is amazing. I do it with a colleague, and after each class, the first class...
Who else teaches that class?
Norm Dazenbrook and I do it together, or another therapist, David Heuser, but it's... and actually Jim Davies, we kind of switch around, but it's after the first class of the session, we kind of look at the parents. It's like everybody's talking, they're very focused, they've created a list of goals for their kids, and we kind of say, when was the last time you sat next to each other and talked for 2 hours?
So this is a class where for 4 weeks, 2 hours a week, exes are sitting beside each other, working together, trying to figure out how to co-parent.
Yeah.
Does this normally happen during a divorce, or does it happen later on in post-divorce issues?
Both. I would like to have them referred to us sooner rather than later. The more time they spend in the system, fighting, the harder it is, the more entrenched they get in their conflict, and
the more resentments are built up.
Yeah, and it becomes, sometimes it almost becomes resistant to any kind of intervention. So I'd like to see them at an earlier stage. Even before guardian ad litem is appointed. Because if they're really unsuccessful in the co-parenting class, then we kind of know, boy, there's going to be some problems here.
Right.
And we're going to have to get other professionals involved. And I can tell you from the research we keep on the class, because the parents do a pre-test and a post-test, basically 2 out of 3 parents make it. They get it, boom, they move on, and it's remarkable. They work in a workbook together, so every class has certain topics. They're required to do homework, a lot of self-reflection, evaluating what they're doing as far as the level of conflict. Are they listening? What's the negative cycle they're stuck in? We focus a lot on containing the emotions, because the emotional world is very reactive that they're living in.
Are there ever any explosions during the actual class?
Sure. You get we frame them. These are the bad habits that they're stuck in, and the other facilitator and I are there to interrupt it. We're not going to let them hurt each other anymore, and we let them know that. Right. So we quickly intervene and get them focused on solving the problem. We teach them very specific procedures for decision-making, problem-solving, expressing a concern and figuring out whether it's a major concern or a minor concern. We have them commit to a weekly phone call.
To each other?
To each other, yep.
To talk, obviously, about the kids.
Right, where they can't really talk about any adult business, they can't make a decision, they can't talk about a concern. It's just talking about the kids, health, school, activities. It's just information.
What do you mean they can't make a decision?
They can't talk about making a decision, like signing Johnny up for soccer. We don't want anything to contaminate this phone call. It's a phone call they commit to that's just completely focused on sharing basic information about their kids.
Because if they start talking about Johnny's signing up for
It'll
soccer,
get derailed.
Someone might disagree with that, and then all of a sudden they start fighting.
Yeah.
I don't think Johnny should be in soccer
Right.
because he's in 3 other extracurriculars. I think he should be because he's going to go great places with it.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then we actually have them, when they are going to make a decision, they have to schedule an appointment and talk about what information do we need to gather to make an intelligent decision.
Are you when you say schedule an appointment, you mean during the course of the co-parenting classes, or afterwards they're supposed to follow through with this?
Though we do some role playing in the class. They can bring a decision and we can work together as a group. They can talk about a concern. In fact, we want to do that. We want to give them the real experience. We have them, when they fill out the evaluations at the end, the post-test, more often than not, they ask for a longer period of time for the class. They want more classes.
Really?
So this is,
And can they do that?
Oftentimes we'll offer our services.
Okay.
And we have talked about having an ongoing support group, co-parenting support group, where they can come and solve problems and talk. And they don't have to come together. It would just be a group that's there to work through some of the difficulties in a healthy way.
Sure. Now, you talked about it's a 4-week class, it's 2 hours a week. Is there a certain structure in terms of what's talked about the first week, the second week,
Yep.
the third week, the fourth week?
Yep.
So what goes on that first week?
So the first week, and this is basically the 6 steps of successful co-parenting, is we talk about the goals. What are the goals? And this is a little bit, if they've taken the PAC class, which most of them should have, they've gotten this basic information. They know about the emotional process, all of this, the adjustment factors, the risks for kids. But we come in and we go, okay, what are the goals here? What do you want for your kids? And kind of where are you at right now?
Right.
What are the obstacles in the way of meeting these goals? And we get, we're not talking to one another, or there's, we can't agree on anything. So we get really clear about the obstacles in the way. And then the task is really about how we address those obstacles and meet the goals. The goals are for the relationship often. We have a kind of a vision for the kids that we have them talk about separately. And we spend a lot of time on this because they all want good things to happen for their kids.
Right.
Nobody tells us they want to raise this, screwed up kid that isn't successful in life.
Sure.
And they really have no argument at the value level. What's important. So we get them to do a little bit of a reflection about that. We have them create goals for their relationship too. Oftentimes it's, that we begin to communicate and cooperate, have a way of making decisions, that our kid doesn't feel tension between us, things like that.
So they formulate their goals.
Yes.
For this co-parenting class.
Yes. And for their relationship.
Okay.
And this is stressful for them.
I can imagine, because they don't even want to think about that they have a relationship of sorts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we are always saying that. You have a relationship. It's your choice on what type of relationship you want to have. And your relationship, 40 years of research, everything points to the most important adjustment factor for kids is the parents' relationship. The level of communication and cooperation. The higher it is, the better adjusted kid you're going to have. The lower it is, there's a direct correlation. It's very, very powerful. The more problems the child's going to have. If parents don't communicate, don't cooperate, you're going to have a kid that has problems.
I find it fascinating to think about having a relationship with an ex that has dramatically changed from being one that was romantic to one that is, I don't even quite know how to describe it. How would you describe it?
Yeah, this is a very complicated psychological and emotional task they're faced with. How they separate out the intimate part of their relationship and become business partners, essentially, to raise a successful kid. There's some parents that do it kind of naturally and intuitively. They're able to separate that out. But, we describe, like...
Are men or women better at it?
Oh, it kind of depends. Really.
Yeah.
I see some gender differences, but not a whole lot.
Depends on the individual.
Absolutely. And some parents get it right away, and others, can have some kind of underlying problems that, really the best you can hope for is that parents move into more of a parallel parenting relationship where they parent right alongside one another. All the communication will be by email, probably not even text, and that it's so structured to provide safety for the child. Unfortunately, that's the reality for some kids. The goal is to reduce the conflict always.
After they formulate goals, then what's the next step?
We move into rules of conduct. So what are the rules of conduct that need to be in place to make your relationship safer? So these start to address...
By rules of conduct, you mean for the parents, not the children?
For the parents, absolutely. For the parents. And so, what are the bad habits? Yelling, screaming, swearing. Is it being on time? Really addressing what gets them in trouble. And them committing them to the rules of conduct. Then in order to... So that's the first night. Goals and rules of conduct.
Okay.
The second night, the second week, is we focus on sharing information. And, there's 4 parts to sharing information. There's the weekly phone call, but then...
Can I just go back for a second? So that first week, goals and rules of conduct. Do they have homework then during the next week to say, hey, are these rules working? Is there anything that needs modified? Did we forget any?
Yeah, they don't. They have independent homework, and it's more along the lines of some kind of quizzes that they take. Self-reflection exercises.
Sure.
Actually assessing the level of conflict, their communication strengths and weaknesses. That we ask them very personal questions about what memories they have, positive memories they have of their parents, and get them to think about the parenting they received and the parenting that they want to provide for their children. So it's a thoughtful time between the first and second session for them to really contemplate on what's important.
And then they come back for that second week, and you said talk about sharing information.
Sharing information, and we talk about the 4 parts of sharing information, the weekly sharing, and we get them to schedule a phone call and figure out who's going to initiate the phone call. And, sometimes...
Is that a big deal about
sometimes
who should initiate the phone call?
Sometimes. Depends on the couple, And this is interesting because... these different areas that we address, there's some people that are actually quite fine in a lot of areas, and they're having like one difficult area. There's others that, are having difficulty in just about every area. They have to figure out a way they immediately contact each other, like a health emergency, or maybe there's been a change in a scheduled activity. So we have them figure out a separate, immediate contact method, how they're going to communicate information at the time of transition, and also how they share the paperwork. So it's complicated, right? So that we kind of separate it all out. They fill in their workbook, and then the homework for the following week is obviously they have to make a phone call. We also talk about access on that second week, and access is how a child is able to go off schedule, or parents are able to go off schedule. Access normalizes what's really an abnormal arrangement, a child living in 2 homes. So if,
You mean the ability of each parent to access the child
Yes.
outside of the normal parenting schedule?
yes, and
Phone
for the
calls.
phone calls, a parent making a request to go off schedule, a child making a request to go off schedule, extended family members.
God forbid that the parenting time schedule that's court ordered ever gets varied. Correct?
Right.
Or did you sense my sarcasm?
Right, right. So, and some people are very cooperative. They're quite flexible. Others, they're not going to flex the time for grandma's funeral. So we try to build in procedures for that. Also help both parents participate in extracurricular activities and school events, that type of thing.
Do couples put this in writing,
Yes.
or do they just talk about it?
Everything's in writing.
Okay.
Everything's in writing. So we cover a lot of information that second night. The third week we talk about transitions, child going back and forth, and how parents can make that easier, kind of the do's and do nots of transition, because it's such a difficult time for a child.
Right.
How parents similarize their homes and coordinate their parenting, which is a huge deal.
You're talking about maybe discipline?
Discipline, rules, routines, supporting each other as parents, so they're not undermining a parent's authority, not taking a child's side against a parent.
I had a client one time who we were just about to engage in a custody battle. And so, we were talking about what we needed to prepare for, et cetera, and I happened to see, she had brought in some emails, and I happened to see an email where the other parent had sent an email and said, hey, Johnny did X, this is my idea about the discipline, what do you think? Mm-hmm. And I stopped my client there and I said, I just want to say I am very impressed with you guys.
Yeah.
I mean, I know we're about to enter a custody battle, I know that we've got some serious litigation ahead of us, but what you are doing right now together will lessen the drama in what's going on. I was
so important.
Very impressed with that. So.
Yeah, very impressed, and your client needed to hear
right.
How important that was, because that is huge for kids.
Yeah. I mean, they get undermined. One of the parents gets undermined in one of the homes, and then there's different rules in the other home. It creates disaster.
I know, and I kind of tongue-in-cheek say to parents, I say this in the PAC class as well as the co-parenting, if you want to raise a sociopath, keep doing it this way. But if you really want a child that's going to follow the rules of society, you're going to coordinate your efforts and give this kid a consistent message so he's not learning how to be an expert at working the system.
Right.
And so that personally is for me a big thing. It's like I really want parents to get that. And then we give them a quick introduction to what we call taking action, which is actually a part of the sharing information too. It's like, when do they have to take action? When we talk about decision making, expressing a concern, resolving conflict, and problem solving.
Okay.
And then the last session, the fourth session, we spend all of that time going over taking action, because this is where parents really need to have skills.
When you say taking action, you mean about what? About discipline or about communication?
About actually about how you make a decision. We have them list the decisions they both want to have input and influence on, which is more comprehensive than how it might be described in the legal custody arrangement. The legal custody arrangement is typically school, medical, religion, and we want to know, if they both want to have part of the decision on who's going to babysit, anything from child care to whether or not they get piercings and tattoos. We want them to cover all the unknowns that typically create conflict.
Do you encourage parents to put this in legal documentation?
What we have,
i.e. a court order?
well, right, what we have at the end, because we want to really separate out that this is about parenting, and you're going to have a parenting relationship, and this is where your kids live, from the legal stuff.
Sure.
Because we're concerned about how you parent your kids and the environment they're being raised in.
The reason I ask is, as a divorce attorney, what I'm thinking back in my mind is, okay, we have this couple or ex-couple that is doing a good job at communicating on September 1st, 2012. It is now December 22nd, 2012, and all hell has broken loose. And what they had written up as an agreement, which has not been incorporated into a court order, is now no longer valid, and the court isn't going to enforce it. So that, thinking...
Yeah, all
maybe
this
I'm being
work,
cynical
right?
because I'm as a divorce attorney, but that's what's in the back of my mind.
Well, I can tell you, it's kind of like mediation in this sense, is that at the end of the workbook, we have a memorandum of understanding, that they transfer all their goals, rules of conduct, sharing information, access, everything that they have written down in their workbook. That's their job to do, because, of course, we're not legal professionals. But we say, put it into this,
Right.
and then you can have it incorporated into a court order if that's what you choose to do.
And this memorandum of understanding, is it typed up?
We don't type it up.
But they can.
They can if they'd like. Or they could give it to their, attorney. I actually have had a couple of people type theirs up because it's been very important to them.
Sure.
Yeah, that's the piece. If I'm working with a couple individually, or like let's say another therapist and I are doing kind of a collaborative co-parenting on an individual basis, which we also do, I will document everything. I will put everything in writing, and I do it as we go. So they're continually kind of reminded about their agreements.
Sure. And that's the final product at the end of the co-parenting classes.
Yes.
After all those 4 weeks, those 8
Yeah.
hours, they come up with this memorandum of understanding.
Right.
That's great. Anything else that we have missed? I'm sure there's a ton. I'll rephrase that. I'm sure there's a ton that we have missed, but in terms of the most important things with co-parenting classes as well as PAC class, anything else to add?
No, I just really appreciate the opportunity to talk about a passion of mine is really helping parents, and what's most important, I think, is the kids, right? The kids and the
Absolutely.
opportunities that they're given to have a life that is not affected by these adult decisions so much.
Sure. If parents want to contact you, Eileen, what's the phone number of your office?
The phone number is 815-877-7228.
And where are you located?
I'm located on the corner of North Main and Riverside. I'm in the same office building as Family Matters PACT.
Well, thanks again, Eileen.
You just heard a phenomenal episode of Divorce Talk Radio. Listen to Divorce Talk Radio live on RockfordCollegeRadio.com Tuesday evenings at 8 p.m. To hear more of Divorce Talk Radio shows, please visit RockfordCollegeRadio.com. To learn more information about attorney Brad Tengler, please visit TenglerLaw.com.